You mentioned keeping the top 7 or 8 players. Obviously, D. Jones is included in that group. What's your optimism as far as being able to work something out with him, and do you anticipate that it will require some kind of tinkering to be able to get to a number?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how we're going to do it, but he's a priority. He's priority 1A and 1B. I think he fits in with our team. He loves it here. We have to figure out, obviously, the dynamics to get him to stay. But, yeah, that's a priority, and we'll do what we have to do to get it done.
So what are the other priorities this summer? You mentioned 1A, 1B.
No, I said he's 1A and 1B.
Oh, he's 1A. He's both. I got you.
Yeah.
Who can the Mavericks add to their core to try to make a run at the NBA Finals again, and why Nico Harrison isn't afraid to do what he has to improve this Mavericks roster? This is Inside the Mavs. Welcome to Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. Appreciate you joining me here for the latest episode of Inside the Mavs. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. And if you're watching this on my YouTube channel at Kevin Gray Sports, make sure you like and comment on the video. Subscribe to the channel as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. A lot to get to as we get ready for the NBA draft and NBA free agency, which is right around the corner. And for the Mavericks, trying to find a way to continue to improve this roster, looking to make another NBA Finals run going into next year. We've already seen Luka Doncic declare that he's going to be playing with Team Slovenia by virtue of the fact that he's on the practice court with the Slovenian national team as they get ready to try and qualify for the Olympics later on this summer. We'll have more on Luka Doncic as the summer goes on, of course, as he'll be looking to try and get back to the Olympic Games. But for the Mavericks, for his team, trying to find a way to improve that roster so that by the time we get to training camp later on in September, this team will be improved, trying to make another run at the NBA Finals. And we have heard that the Mavericks, of course, are interested in several different players, and more importantly, how do they find a way to utilize the contract of Tim Hardaway Jr., who's on an expiring deal with $16.2 million in terms of his final year on his contract? How do they use that? Potentially the 2025 first-round pick that they have and the 2031 first-round pick that they have to make some things shake going into NBA free agency and in this offseason. Because when you look at the Mavericks and the assets that they have, well, yes, they have those couple of first-rounders that we mentioned, the expiring contract of Tim Hardaway Jr. As of right now, they only have the $5.1.2 million mid-level exception. And when you're talking about potentially keeping a guy in Derrick Jones Jr., whose number is going to be well exceeding that 5.1 or 5.2, depending on where you see and read it at in terms of the mid-level exception, it's going to take a little bit more to keep Derrick Jones Jr. into the fold going into next year and beyond, if that's something that you as a Mavericks fan want to see continue to happen, as he was able to turn himself into an extremely important piece for the Mavericks during their NBA Finals run. But if you're looking at some names outside of what right now is Derrick Jones Jr. in terms of him being the free agent that the Mavericks have made their priority 1A and 1B, we know that Dante Exum, his contract is non-guaranteed, $3.15 million guarantees here in the next week or so. And of course, when you're looking at how this roster continues to be put together, we turn to Bobby Marks and some of the information that he has for us based on what the Mavericks have and what they're able to do. When you start looking at their assets and their profile going into the summer, you look at what you see. They have $6.9 million to send out in terms of a trade. They can receive $7 million in terms of money coming back. And you look at their cap space breakdown right now, the Mavericks are $1.8 million over the luxury tax and $3.6 million below the first apron. They would exceed that first apron if the roster stays intact and Derrick Jones Jr. is brought back, which we've heard from Nico Harrison that money isn't necessarily an object for this team. When you look at the Adelson family and what they have, they are an extremely rich family that could, if they wanted to, pay significant luxury tax if that's something that they desire to do. Even with the way that the NBA rules are set up, it makes it much more prohibitive to have and go over that apron because it restricts you in your ability to roster build. That's part of the reason why you're looking, if you're the Mavericks, to find a way to get some cheaper talent, but also utilize the talent that's already there in terms of a Derek Lively II, who at 20 years of age is turning into a real star for the Mavericks. You've got two guys at 25 years of age when it comes to Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington, who still continue to develop and get better. And obviously, one of the best players, if not the best player in the league right now, is 25 years of age, and Luka Doncic, who after this upcoming season is going to be eligible to sign the richest contract in the history of the association. So your ability to build not only with cheap young talent, but also find creative ways, if you're the Nico Harrison general manager of this front office for the Mavericks, to be able to build this team going forward, you have to find ways to do it. And one of the ways that you'll be able to is to be able to utilize the contract, as we mentioned, of Tim Hardaway Jr. at $16.2 million. You also have a guy in Maxi Kleber who's going into the second year of his 3-year, $33 million contract, $11 million straight up per year for each of those 3 years. So if you're looking to move both of them potentially to a Portland to try and maybe get a Jerami Grant, who, yes, I know for some of you have been a little bit not necessarily on that train, who at 30 years of age, who may have traded his opportunities to be able to be a scorer with Portland to take the kind of money, which honestly I don't necessarily begrudge, but I think at this point in his career, he may find an opportunity to want to win. Maybe you look at that down the road. I use that as an example because when you start looking at some of these players around the league and who you have said that you may want to see on this roster, it may have to come from a trade standpoint. And the reason why I point this out is for Nico Harrison, he has been unafraid to try and take big swings to improve this team. We mentioned the Derek Lively trade that he was able to make on draft night. Also being able to get Omax Prosper. He's also made a move in the draft, of course, to go get Jaden Hardy and the other moves that we know in terms of getting Kyrie Irving, so on and so forth. My point being, don't sleep on Nico Harris's ability and this front office's ability to get creative, which brings me to some of the names that we've started to hear mentioned. We mentioned Tobias Harris and Jerami Grant in our last conversation, that we had a new name popping up according to Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype for USA Today is a guy in Landry Shamet. Landry Shamet, a guy who is a 38% three-point shooter for his career, averaged over 7 points per game in just under 16 minutes per game last year with the Washington Wizards, has $22.75 million in non-guaranteed salary over the next 2 years, a reserve guard that could provide you some shooting off the bench for a team that we know is looking for much more three-point shooting, but also needing to find a playmaker as well. Landry Shamet could be a possibility for the Mavericks there. For some of you who have jumped into my mentions are like, no, I'm not necessarily on the Landry Shamet train, given the fact that he's last year shot under 34% from the three-point line, and concerns about what may have been happening with him in Washington. But we know it's worked out for the last person that the Mavericks traded for from the Washington Wizards in terms of Daniel Gafford. Maybe a change of scenery for Shamet, going to a team that's literally a championship contender could do him some good, again, in a reserve role. And that's the thing that you have to start thinking about in terms of the realistic names that the Mavericks could potentially go after. Much more on a couple of other names that could be realistic targets via trade for the Dallas Mavericks to help them potentially get better this offseason. But before we get there, let's hear from today's sponsor of our video, and let's hear from Aura. Today's video is brought to you by Aura. Do a Google search on your name and email address to see how much information comes up about you. I was devastated by the amount of information that I could be seeing searching my name and profile, and I knew then I needed to be protected for not just myself, but also for my family. Data brokers sell your information to scammers, spammers, and anyone else who may want to target you. Your full name, email, home address, health records, your relatives, it's all out there. That's why I've been using Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura shows me which data brokers are selling my information and automatically submits opt-out requests for me. Cleaning up my information not only helps reduce the amount of spam I get, but it protects me from hackers who could use this information to help them access my social media accounts, bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Aura also does so much more to protect me and my family from online threats that I can't see. It's really easy to set up, so I don't have to download several different apps to get things like antivirus, VPN, password management, parental controls, identity theft insurance, and more. I get everything at one affordable price. You may already have one of these tools already, but not having Aura is like locking the front door and leaving the back door wide open. Aura is always on, doing the hard work to protect me and my family so I can focus on other tasks with peace of mind. I value my privacy and I value yours. You can go to aura.com/Kevin Gray to start your 2-week free trial. Please see the link in the description. Back here on Inside the Mavs, thank you for hanging out with us through our spot, and thank you to today's sponsor of our video, in Aura, as we continue to throw about names that the Mavericks could make a trade for to help improve this roster, knowing that they've got limited resources to be able to do so, but can find creative ways, as we know that Nico Harrison has been unafraid to make big swings to improve this roster. In fact, here's Nico Harrison talking about the pieces that the Mavericks have and why they feel good about their core, those 7-8 guys that made and had huge impacts, of course, on the Mavericks' run to the NBA Finals and what that means for this team and their outlook going into this summer. Take a listen.
Nico, you said you love this core and your goal is to build this team for championship aspirations. When you look at the roster construction, what areas would you say needs to improve for this team?
Really, I think we have the pieces. I think we just need to get better ourselves. Since I've been here, I've always, but our front office staff, we've always been looking to make it better. So we'll continue to do that. But the core is intact. If you look at our top 7-8 players that play the biggest minutes, I don't see anything happening with that.
So Nico Harrison talking about the pieces that the Mavericks have and how good they feel about those pieces going into this offseason and into next year, utilizing the experience that these guys have gotten to be able to hopefully make another run, another deep run in the NBA playoffs next year. But when you look at what the Mavericks need in terms of floor spacing forwards, 3-and-D perimeter depth as well, there are things that the Mavericks could utilize via trade, whether you're looking at veterans or young players, that if you utilize the assets that you have in terms of the Tim Hardaway Jr. expiring contract, also the 2025 first-round pick that you have, the 2031 first-round pick that you have as well, that you could make some things shake. We talked a little bit earlier about Landry Shamet. We've mentioned guys like Tobias Harris. We have mentioned guys also in Jerami Grant. I want to point you back to Washington when it comes to a guy that Mavericks fans have fallen in love with and would love to see potentially in a Mavericks uniform in terms of Deni Avdija. At 23 years of age, 6'9", 210, a guy that can shoot, a guy that averaged nearly 15 points per game last year. When you look at what he was able to do in terms of his shooting numbers, last year shot over 37% from the three-point line. And at 23 years old, a young player who still has yet much more development to continue to grow into and is on the upswing in terms of being a really good player in this league, and someone who was averaging around $14 million a year in terms of salary. And when you're looking at what the Mavericks have in terms of the Maxi Kleber contract, when you look at the Josh Green extension, when you look at the Tim Hardaway Jr. contract, you can find a way to maybe utilize one of those first-round picks if you desire to try to make something shake for, I'm sure, a Washington team that would be looking for significant compensation to part with one of their young players who at 23 years old is going to be coveted around the NBA. But that's a name that a lot of folks, a lot of Mavericks fans who are throwing in my mentions as well in terms of who they would like to see potentially as part of a trade here. And again, you have to think about the creativity of the front office and what they would have to utilize in order to get a young player like a Deni Avdija, but he fits the skill set that the Mavericks are looking for in terms of a guy that can shoot the ball well from three, provides you length and some size, and a guy that you look at last year averaged nearly 4 assists per game, so a little bit of playmaking from Avia as well. But again, you would have to use significant assets to try and acquire him, someone who may be a little bit more realistic to get, who's on the more veteran side of things. I point you to Portland when it comes to Malcom Brogdon, a favorite of a lot of Mavericks fans throughout the years with his consistency, his ability to defend, and at 31 years old, has $22.5 million over the next 2 years coming to him. But at the same time, Brogdon, who at 31 years old, is in a place right now he would come in and step in and be able to be a veteran on this team that can provide you a lot of different things. A guy that can handle the basketball, can be able to put the ball on the deck and be able to make some plays a little bit, but also provide you some consistency on the defensive end. The question will be, how healthy can he stay as he gets older into his career? But when you start looking at some of those names, even if you're looking at the buyout market or the veteran minimum guys that could be available, when you look at guys like Patrick Beverley or an Eric Gordon or Robert Covington and others, when you start looking at that veteran minimum market, there's going to be some interesting names that are out there to potentially help the Mavericks try to get better as a team. But when you're looking at guys like a Malcom Brogdon or a Deni Avdija, or as another names that we mentioned earlier, you're finding guys on that second or third tier that can come in and be able to help you right away. The Mavericks, if they're going to take big swings at this, would have to use significant draft capital in terms of the first-round picks that will be available to them starting on draft night, but also finding a way to utilizing and the combining of salaries when it comes to THJ, Maxi Kleber, Josh Green, if you're willing to part with a Jaden Hardy as well to try to make some of this shake. And if you can, and your willingness is able to do so, then the Mavericks could really utilize some of these pieces that are out there. But these names will continue to float around when it comes to the Mavericks and their ability to improve this roster going into next year. Again, limited assets based on what they have right now, but Nico Harrison's ability to utilize what he has been able to be given, to turn different pieces into much bigger ones when you look at what he's been able to do in terms of acquiring the likes of a Kyrie Irving, moving on from Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie to acquire him, moving on from Kristaps Porzingis to acquire a guy in Spencer Dinwiddie that helped him get to the Western Conference Finals a couple of years ago. We mentioned a little bit earlier what he was able to do on draft night with getting Derek Lively II, also getting Omax Prosper, who we're going to see during Summer League this upcoming summer as well. Any number of moves that you think about that this team under Nico Harrison has made, it's all been in the name of trying to improve this roster as quickly as they can based off of what's available to them to keep this window open that the Mavericks have right now. So don't sleep on what Nico Harrison has done in terms of improving this team, what he still could be able to do, and the players that you're looking at to try and make some of these things happen, given the fact that Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract is an attractive one, being an expiring contract. And yes, Maxi Kleber provides you defensive versatility. And for those who are concerned about some of the depth being knocked off a little bit when this team, you've got to find some higher end players, because by the time you get to the NBA playoffs anyway, most teams are going to be shortening their rotations to 7 to 8 guys. And right now, you've got a terrific starting five when you look at Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Derrick Jones Jr., P.J. Washington, and Daniel Gafford. You've got Derek Lively coming off the bench. You still have Dante Exum there as well. You believe that a guy like Jaden Hardy, if you keep him, will continue to take the next step there as well. Yes, you're going to be having some guys be able to have the depth shortened a little bit, but at the same time, you should be able to get a little bit better in terms of what you have. And especially if you acquire a guy, let's say, for example, Jerami Grant, you insert him into the starting lineup. Now a Derrick Jones Jr., who you retained, can now go to the bench, and now your bench is that much more better because of him being on it alongside either Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively, whomever you want to have coming off the bench in terms of your front line. So all of these things are in the name of strengthening the top 7, 8 guys that you have, but also ensuring that you've got enough depth, bench depth behind it with Dante Exum, Jaden Hardy, and others to be able to have playmaking, shooting, but also some size to be able to defend. And if you can get some of that additional scoring, you could be right there as well. So it will be very, very interesting to see how this Mavericks front office finds different ways to improve this roster based on the assets that they have available to them, the needs that they have, and what that will look like going into NBA free agency, but also in the trade market as well as we get ready for the NBA draft. And maybe at number 58, you could steal a guy like a Cam Spencer, a sharpshooter from UConn, who could be there as well at number 58 when you start looking at the NBA draft. A lot of different things and ways for this Mavericks team to get better all of which will continue to play themselves out over the next several days as we see NBA free agency and the NBA draft come upon us. But it'll be no shortage of news, and we'll keep you up to date with everything going on when it comes to Luka Doncic, when it comes to this entire Mavs team throughout the offseason, when it comes to the NBA draft and NBA free agency going forward. That'll do it for this episode of Inside the Mavs. Again, thank you so much for joining me here on this episode. Make sure you download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts for free. Give it a 5-star rating and write a review for it while you're there. If you watch this on my YouTube channel, make sure you like and comment on the video. Subscribe to the channel. Let me know who you want to see on this Mavericks team. In my last video, I know you guys jumped all in the comments. Let me know who you wanted to see, how you wanted them to get there. Let me know. Continue to let me know in the feedback, and we'll talk about it here on Inside the Mavs. My name is Kevin Gray, Mavericks Pre and Post Game host on the Dallas Mavericks Radio Network. This has been Inside the Mavs, presented by Aura.